All right. Okay, so next up we have Charlotte. And let me put up the next slide. There we go. All right. So Charlotte is the Chief Behavioral Officer at Merits. She leads the company's practice of behavioral science and innovation. She's got expertise in social psychology and behavioral economics. And Charlotte connects really academic theory and applied business practice, applying the use of field research, which is really exciting, to better make sense of human behavior, which we all can relate to, in the evolving marketplace. Charlotte's led a number of different programs in neuromarketing, social media, and global branding. And Charlotte joins us today specifically to share some of her research and help us really broaden our perspective on what we think of when we think of traditional sales incentives. It's really about more than just bonuses and commissions. And as you guys are coming in, head this direction. There's a breeze over here. Come on over. I highly recommend it. Shift over. All right, Charlotte, come on up here. Here you are. And these are unopened.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. All right. Thanks for having me. Let's start with a little game. Everybody raise your hands for me, please. Raise your hand. High as you can. Okay, now raise them just a little higher. Okay, why didn't you raise them that high the first time? I said high as you can, right? Well, this to us is what the incentive recognition and reward industry is really all about. It's that extra 10% we all have within us at any point. I told you high as you can, but I know if I say just a little higher, there's a way I can get you to raise your hand just a little higher. And that's what we really want to get out of our employees and our salespeople. And that's where smart incentive design comes into play. So let me just get this off the table right now. Cash is really important. This conversation is not about cash doesn't matter, cash isn't important. This is a quote from the movie The Heist. Everybody needs money, that's why they call it money, right? We all know that. So cash compensation, variable comp, is an important part of our lives that enables people to buy the things they need to be psychologically and physically secure, to secure the lifestyle that's socially acceptable, just to kind of cover their basic needs. You need to pay your people fairly, compensate them fairly, make them feel like they're appreciated with that fair-based compensation. But at a certain point, cash compensation is table stakes, right? It's kind of a hygiene factor. It's something that needs to be raised and be treated fairly, and then it's sort of off the table when it comes to talking about getting that incremental above and beyond effort that we want to talk about today. So what do we need to think about when we think about finding that extra 10% from an incentive standpoint? This is where applied behavioral science really gets interesting. And what we do at Merits is ground everything in our incentive recognition and reward solutions in an understanding of people and behavior. And part of what my team does is connect with the academic community and try to better understand the work that they're doing, whether that's in the lab or theoretical work, which we'll talk a bit about today. But increasingly, and what we really want to see more of, is field research. And that's when we take work from the lab to real-world organizations and partner with academics and partner organizations to do experiments or data analyses to understand how things really work. So when we talk about behavioral science, that's behavioral economics, social psychology, to really understand that we need to put people in context of a real incentive program. So that's the kind of thing that we work on through our academic research exchange. So let's start with an example. I'm talking about cash versus peer pressure versus non-cash and trying to motivate behavior. This example is sort of a hybrid lab field study done out of Harvard Business School looking at a behavior of hand washing, which is a really important behavior to motivate in the context of a hospital setting. So in this case, the researchers had a group of nurses and doctors being encouraged to wash their hands. One group was paid to do so with a cash bonus. At the end of a 4-month period, they were promised $1,200 after hitting that set amount of hand washes. Whereas the other group, so there's that cash group, there's another group in the test they were sort of peer pressured into washing their hands. So they were treated with messages, notes, notes from others saying, thank you for washing your hands, or we're counting on you, sort of a shame message, please wash your hands. And they measured which one sort of drove an increase in hand washing behavior. And what they found was they both worked. Actually, cash worked better at first. There was a faster uptick in hand washing behavior when people were paid for that with cold hard cash. But when the incentive was removed, when that period was over after that few-month incentive program, it was the peer pressure people that actually lasted. So those who were paid with cash basically plummeted to pre-baseline levels of hand washing once that incentive was removed. And you didn't see that effect with the peer pressure. And if this feels familiar to anyone in the room, if there are any parents who've given into the temptation to pay your kids to wash to clean their room or do their homework, sometimes that's tempting in the short term, but what happens the next time you ask them to clean their room, right? There's sort of an expectation. So we call that crowding out intrinsic motivation. When you turn a behavior that you want to be habitual into a cash transaction, then people don't really want to do it again without the cash once that incentive's removed. So another example, this time with pizza, so better. This is Dan Ariely at Duke University. Look at this in context of a real-world organization, so a field experiment. He did this at a semiconductor factory in Israel, actually, and he had a group of workers producing chips at a semiconductor factory and tested uplift in performance in different types of motivation settings, different types of incentives. So one group was promised with a cash incentive, one to receive a verbal compliment, a text message from their boss saying, great job, and a third group was promised pizza to take home to their family, be the hero, right? Sort of a non-cash metaphor. And again, what he found was they all worked. All three conditions had an increase in performance. Incentives work in the short term, and there wasn't a huge difference regarding which type of incentive. But yet again, what mattered was when the incentive was over, and when he removed all of those incentives, the cash condition plummeted to pre-baseline levels and actually produced fewer chips than they had before the incentive program was ever introduced. So there's this danger sometimes of cash-based incentive programs when the intention is to go above and beyond and go perform an extra behavior beyond the day. That's where cash can sometimes crowd out intrinsic motivation and become a problem. So this can be somewhat confusing, right? How then do we design for true motivation? I'm not saying that cash is bad and that that's a really important component of how we motivate people, but to get at that intrinsic enthusiasm, that extra 10%, the passion to sort of to keep doing better because it's the right thing to do, and most importantly, to drive lasting improvement that remains after these incentive sprints are over. How do we tap those motivators? Well, one model we really like to look at is the four-drive theory of motivation, which comes from the work of Paul Lawrence and the current dean of Harvard Business School, Nit Noria. This is meant to be sort of a comprehensive point of view on different drivers that people have of intrinsic motivation. The first is the drive to acquire. So this applies to tangible rewards like cash and stuff, as well as intangible rewards like status. But in any case, it's always relative. Nothing is concrete. When I give you something and I ask how much is that worth to you, well, it depends on a lot of other things, especially on what your neighbor has. And we'll go into that a bit. But there's that drive to acquire, which is usually the baseline of most incentive programs that assume do this, get more stuff. But equally important is the drive to bond. We're inherently a social species, and we're wired from birth to connect with others. That's a super powerful motivator. And we'll have some good examples there today, too. There's the drive to create, which is to find meaning in the world, to make a difference. The feeling you have when you learn something new, when you master a new challenge, when you set a goal and you hit it, that can be sometimes feel better than any incremental reward on top of that. So there's this really powerful drive to create and to the sense of mastery that you can get from that. And then lastly, the drive to defend. This can relate to all three of these things. So if you've acquired some new status or thing, if you've built a relationship with someone, right? Can you feel defensive about relationships that you have, that you hold close? Or if you've created something and you feel like that's my baby, that's my startup, I created it, you feel this defensiveness or this drive, this sense of ownership to protect what's mine. This is also where we experience a sense of fairness, which is so ingrained in us that we tend to, this has been proven time and again in the lab, where people will reject offers that they perceive to be unfair, even though they're walking away from free money on the table. If they perceive that it's not, equal to what the other person is receiving, then we just give up free money. And it's actually not only humans that do that. Other non-human primates do that in their own way as well, with grapes and bananas and stuff, but we don't have time to get into chimp studies today. But the drive to defend is really important as well. So I'll just take you through a few design rules or criteria or best practices that we've sort of laddered up to these 4 drives. Let's start with status. So status over things, this is really about that sense of relativity and that everything is relative. So we like to be the big fish in the small pond. People will choose the scenario to earn $90,000 at a company where the average earning is $75,000 over the chance to earn $100,000 in a company where the average is $115,000. Right? So we leave $10,000 on the table just for the chance to make more than everyone else. That's kind of a consistent thing we find in the lab, and that's how kind of irrational but important this sense of relativity is. And a more real-world example of that, particularly in a sales context, people are willing, this is the name of an actual academic paper by Ian Larkin called Paying $30,000 for a Gold Star. Title says it all. This is a great analysis of a software company and an analysis of the incentive program for those salespeople at the software company. They have an accelerated commission program which enables them to earn more on sales as they get later in the quarter, and this resets each quarter. They also offer a President's Club, which rewards the top 10% of sales performers with sort of a status-based, you get a weekend trip, some social recognition, an email from the boss of the company, and a trophy. You know, it's largely symbolic. The trip is worth something, but nowhere near this $30,000 number, which I'm alluding to because what Ian Larkin found was that the salespeople, it would make sense to defer sales toward the end of a quarter to get that higher commission, but they were consistently burning up those sales early on for the chance to get into the President's Club. So basically they were sacrificing on average $30,000 in cash commission for that status and recognition of being special and being part of that club. So a really powerful example of a real world case of status sort of trumping just cash incentive. We're so attuned to this idea of status. It's something we're very, very sensitive to. Where do I rank against other people around me? Again, title says it all. This paper is called Feeling Superior. And that's this idea that Nunez and Drezzi explored looking at, in this case, it was loyalty programs, but we use these practices in our sales incentive design as well. And there's an idea that you can measure how people feel about their sense of status. So this first one was looking at if you have more people in that top tier, and if you imagine you're in the top tier of a program, you're in that kind of upper echelon, how do you feel about your status when there's more elites in that top tier, when there's more people in there with you, right? Feel a lower sense of status. It goes down. It's not worth as much to me because there's a lot of other people in this club. So then they looked at what happens if you add more tiers beneath you. So you still stay the same amount of people with you in that club, but there's a bunch more layers below you. That feels good, right? I've stayed the same, but relatively speaking, I know there's more people beneath me, which feels good, relatively speaking. And then there's also keeping things the same, but just adding status-laden symbols, which the most common ones we see are medals. You see those in the Olympics and everywhere else, so gold, silver, platinum. This sort of speaks to the power of symbolism in status and just keeping a program exactly the same, but adding a symbol like that and saying this is gold or this is silver makes them feel a higher sense of status with that symbol. So a lot of nuances to the design of these programs that tap into our intrinsic awareness of where we stand from a status standpoint. Speaking of medals, does anyone recognize this meme from a few years ago? This is Michaela from the Olympics. She was a very disappointed silver medalist, and you can tell by her look of disgust from the podium there. This is a great photo that made its way around the internet and a ton of memes where she's just in the background of these spectacular events looking really disappointed. And there's a reason why, and scientists have looked at this in an Olympic race years earlier, but they analyzed the facial expressions of people standing on the podium in the first, second, and third place and actually measured how natural their smiles were and found that this consistent effect, that second place people look miserable. And the theory here is, we call it the silver medal effect, but psychologically speaking, it's about upward counterfactuals. A counterfactual is a way of saying what might have been. And it's another way of thinking about everything is relative. Are you happy about something? Well, I don't know. What could have happened? Like, what am I comparing myself to? So when you're in third place, your counterfactual is, I almost didn't make it up here at all, right? This is pretty awesome. I'm up here getting a medal, so third place is amazing because I'm comparing it to a downward counterfactual of not placing at all. Whereas second place, they're thinking, oh, I just missed it. I have this upward counterfactual. I could have had the gold. So kind of a funny difference there and something to really think about in our incentive programs as well. How do you differentiate, take special care of those people in the second place? And there's research that shows that if you're giving awards for second place, it should be very different from the award people have in first place, not a smaller version of the first place prize, which is just kind of an extra salt in the wound, so to speak. So moving on to drive to bond and how we're such a social species. There's countless evidence just in our brains and in our wiring how we're really wired from birth to be a social species. And this comes about in our daily lives, in our workplace, lots of great examples from academia. One of my favorites, this poor sweet boy, is meant to represent a really interesting study by Uri Nizi, another Israeli psychologist who looked at this great case study of a daycare center in Israel that was having a problem where the students or the parents who kept showing up late and inconveniencing the daycare providers who had to stay late and wait for the parents to come and pick up their children. So the daycare center had a totally rational idea and said, we're going to set up a fine and punish these parents for showing up late, and that'll teach them, and they'll start coming on time so they don't have to pay this fine. Well, it totally backfired. So the name of this paper is A Fine is a Price. And that's what happened in the minds of the parents. They said, oh, okay, $10, I can afford that. Actually, I can afford $20. I'm just going to come a whole hour late now. So you shifted this mindset from the social norm of you need to show up on time because that's the right thing to do, treat these people with respect, to a market norm. That's, oh, this is just a transaction? Okay, I can totally pay some money and come late. So that's a really kind of groundbreaking foundational study around this concept of social norms versus market norms. And when you think about it, it applies to lots of areas of our life. It's the same reason why when your buddies help you move, you don't thank them by writing them a check. You thank them with pizza and beer, right? But you don't give your friend a gift and you make sure that the price tag comes off of the gift before it's embarrassing if she sees how much the gift was worth. It kind of ruins the experience. Or one of my favorite moments from Seinfeld, Jerry gives Elaine a gift and it's wrapped up all nice and with a bow in a box, and she opens it up, she's all excited, and it's a pile of cash. And she's like, cash? Like it's offensive. You know, that's not what you do in a social context. So this applies in the workplace as well. We want to think about if you're looking for that incremental effort, if sometimes you want people to they need to stay late or they need to come in on the weekends, cash isn't always going to do it. Sometimes we need to think about feeling that sense of reciprocity that comes from setting up a social norm. Social norms can also be an incredibly powerful way to motivate or nudge behavior, especially when a behavior is new to people and they're not sure what they're supposed to be doing. So this is a great famous case study by Robert Cialdini that looks at the towels in your hotel room. Is everyone familiar with that sign? It's now pretty much ubiquitous. Now we kind of know what to do with our towels, but at a period of time, this was kind of a slow learning curve. And hotels were putting up these signs encouraging you to recycle your towels for the good of the environment, help us save water, and hang up your towel if you're willing to reuse it. I'm sure it was just for the environment and not for the cost of the water, but that's fine. Either way, it's good. So Cialdini and his colleagues had an idea when they realized that people were starting to pick this up. It was getting some momentum. He said, well, why don't you make that salient to people and tell them that other people do this? Create a social norm out of this practice, and maybe that'll get them to do it more. So they tested this. So they worked with a real hotel and tried the baseline or the control condition is a basic standard environmental message, which says, please recycle your towels, it's good for the environment. But the test group, they looked at a social message, which says, most people who stay in this hotel recycle their towels. So you should do that too, right? That's the social norm. That's the thing you should do because others do it. And they found a 26% increase in that behavior of recycling towels. It really, really worked. And then they had kind of a crazy idea, and they thought, well, can we make it even more specific? Can we strengthen this social proof somehow? So what they did was add a somewhat arbitrary layer of in-group feeling where they said, most people who stay in this room, in room 123, recycle their towels, and you should do that too. And sure enough, another 7% lift in towel recycling behavior. So it's kind of funny because I don't want to think about the people who have stayed in my room before, let alone think of being in their tribe, but this is deeply ingrained sort of subconscious bias at work here, and it's an incredibly powerful nudge effect. Selphie value. We love this phrase at Merits. This is the idea that we are always influenced by our social environment, even when we're alone, right? Because our social world is in our pockets, and we're always sharing it with our social networks now. So rewards and incentives are a great way to tap into that and give people shareable experiences that they want to show off to their friends. Tough to brag about your cash bonus, sometimes considered socially inappropriate, but to showcase a trip you've won or a new valuable piece of merchandise that means something to you, we call that selfie value, what used to sort of be trophy value. And there's evidence from fMRI studies that show that when your friends validate you and say, like, great job, or that's really cool, or you're awesome, that activates the same neural pathways as when someone's receiving cash. So we kind of think of that as a double win. On top of the gift itself, you're also getting this incremental gift of recognition from your friends, which is really powerful. Moving through to the drive to create, this is about the pursuit of mastery, and to me, I think of this as goals. I'm sure there's a lot of overachievers in the room. We're a goal-setting group of people, and really our human species is all about the drive to learn, create, set a goal, crush it, set a new goal. This is one of the most powerful motivators for all of us. And if there are any runners in the room, this is hard to see, the gray behind it, but if this isn't the best example of the power of goal setting, I don't know what is. This is a distribution of the New York Marathon running times, and you can see how I hope you can see the light gray clusters around these bar charts. And what this shows is sort of the clustering around these seemingly arbitrary numbers, like, for example, the 4-hour complete time, which is the most common goal that people set in finishing a race. And normally, with a normal distribution curve, you see kind of a smooth bell chart. But here you see this clustering around these goals and just to the left of them. So in this particular study, they found that 3:59 as a finishing time is 1.4 times as likely as 4:01. You know, people will do anything to just hit that last goal by the last second. Talk about that extra 10%, right? And you know, how does it feel to finish a race at 4:01 versus 3:59, right? If you remember that counterfactual or what could have been, it sucks. This is how it feels. It sucks. So that's how powerful goal setting really is. And we see this in loyalty programs and incentive programs. This was studied in a lab environment, in people drinking coffee and earning points for that. Basically, in any environment, you can test this. There's this intrinsic awareness of approaching a goal. We know when our eyes are closed, when we're getting close to a goal, and we accelerate. We find that extra 10% and we make it happen. And reward and incentive programs can really be tailored to tap into that by accelerating the frequency and urgency of communications. When we know someone's near a goal, we say, you're close, you're almost there. Another good study about goals, turns out you can actually endow people with a sense of kind of wind at their tails, give them a sense that they're on their way. This is a study by Nunez and Drazy about a car wash loyalty program, kind of a hypothetical situation they created with a real car wash. They created 2 conditions of a loyalty punch card here, where in both cases, you need to earn 8 more car washes to get your next one free. But in the first condition, it's just a blank card. Here you go. You need 8 car washes and you get your 9th free. In the second card, they say, here you go. And bonus, we've already given you 2. You just need 8 more to get your next card free. So rationally speaking, it's the same proposition for the customers. They still have to come in and spend on 8 car washes. But the difference is quite profound. That first group, 19% come back to get their next car wash. Almost double the number come back when they've got a sense that they're already on their way. They've been gifted or endowed with a bit of progress. We call that the endowed progress effect. So granting a bonus head start enhances that motivation by giving them that sort of wind at my tails feeling. And we do this all the time in incentive programs with a fast start mechanism of giving extra bonus points to get started on your way. People are like, okay, I'm already going. So a lot you can do there just with tapping into the intrinsic power of goals themselves before even thinking about an incremental reward on top of hitting the goal. And then the fourth and final drive ownership, or this is the drive to defend, and we like to talk about ownership here. This one is really important to use your powers for good. There's the kind of risky territory here when you start getting into people's intrinsic sense of loss and fairness. But the fairness concept, as I said, is really key. This is where we see people leaving money on the table when they perceive a deal not to be fair. And also there's this almost magic sense of ownership that occurs when this relative sense of value goes up when someone has been endowed or feels that they own something. And I'll give you some great examples of this and how it can be used in an incentive context. My favorite is another one by Dan Ariely, who's kind of a king of behavioral science right now. He did this study at Duke, where basketball is kind of a big deal. So the only way you can get access to a basketball ticket at Duke as a student is through the raffle system. And he did this around the Final Four period when it was really, really difficult to get tickets. And he asked the students who didn't have a ticket, he said, I have a ticket. How much are you willing to pay for this? And on average, they say about $170, which is perfectly rational. That's about what the ticket was worth. But the interesting part was when he went up to the students who did have a ticket, the lucky ones who had one from the lottery, and he said, I really want one. How much are you willing to accept? How much do I have to give you to take that ticket from you? Any guesses? 170 was the willingness to pay? 250, least double. Good, 350, great intuition. Yeah, it's more. It's actually 14 times more. $2,400 was the average willingness to accept. I heard about this study 10 times. I keep going and looking up the original paper, and it's definitely $2,400, 14x multiple. That's how powerful this endowment effect is, which is that we ascribe more value to things simply because we own them, when we own them. There's one study that actually looked at applying this in a performance context, where they took a group of math teachers. It was done by some professors at Harvard, as well as one of the economics professors who wrote the book Freakonomics. This is a great study where they applied this idea to performance by working with math teachers, and they took a test sample and paid them their bonus up front and said, this is yours to keep or lose depending on how your students do, versus the status quo of we'll pay you at the end of the month if, right? And sure enough, they found that the upfront condition, that advanced payout with the threat of it being taken away, was really motivating. And those students performed up to 11% more bonus points than the control group. So this is something that we're thinking about too from a sales incentive perspective. We're testing this in some programs, and really excited to see how that plays out. And we see this in the marketplace all the time through the proliferation of free trials. By the way, direct TV marketing is one of the best industries that uses behavioral economics principles all the time. So we're always kind of mining this for examples. But the free trial is a great example of endowing people. Once you've given them something for free, they feel that they own it, and it's now worth up to 14 times as much apparently, and you can see why then they don't want to give it up. So you really see that a lot. So just by way of a quick recap here, to kind of sum up everything we said, cash is crucial, right? Everybody needs money. That's why we call it money. Unfair pay is a non-starter. So it's, if we're talking about incentive programs and reward, don't even talk to us if you're not paying your people fairly. There's a great study that a guy on our team likes to quote, or not a study, but just a quote in the press that Elon Musk got in some trouble for his people not complaining about fair pay. And he said something like, well, we're going to have a bunch of employee events and we've got free frozen yogurt. It's like, frozen yogurt's not going to cut it, if you're not paying fairly. So really important, but beware of crowding out intrinsic motivation. If there are behaviors that you're looking to encourage on the above and beyond spectrum and make those habitual, then tapping intrinsic motivators is the way to go. So we encourage you to design to tap into all of those 4 drives, not just the drive to acquire, which is relative, but also the drive to bond and see what others are doing and build community and relationship with others. The drive to create, set goals, hit them, set new goals, find mastery and the joy of learning and being great at your craft, and carefully tap into that drive to defend, encouraging people to feel a sense of skin in the game, right? Like I'm invested in this, I have some ownership in this program. And most importantly, as a behavioral scientist, I beseech you to test and learn. These are best practices that we've called from existing literature, but we don't know what works until we test it in real-world programs. So learn how to do A/B tests. Work with us in A/B tests. I've got cards in your hands where you can reach out to us, and we'll connect you with some academic partners to do free research. We all want to learn together. That's what behavioral design is all about. So with that, I will close. Just kidding, surprise. We have one more principle. So in this final principle is surprise itself. So here's one of my favorite motivators or behavioral design principles that we love to implement. It's the idea of intermittent reinforcement. Humans love positive surprises. We love positive random rewards. That's why the surprise and delight is so powerful and popular in consumer programs. That's why lottery systems are common, slot machines, bonus rewards points, sweepstakes. These are all based on intermittent rewards, random. We're not sure if we're going to win or not. We love to think about what might be possible. So that's why we love to do surprise and delights as part of our incentive programs. It's just a way to show, hey, I appreciate you, and you didn't even see this coming, but it's incredibly delightful. So to thank you all for being such an attentive audience, I'd like to ask you to please look at your cards and see what number you got there, because we're going to do a little surprise and delight of our own. 63. Okay, so I am going to pull up my handy Google random number generator, which every good scientist keeps in her pocket. And I'm going to generate a random number, and that's going to be our lucky winner, okay? Number 8. Number 8, congratulations. You've won a Google Home for your friends at Merritt's. Awesome. Woo! Enjoy. So that really is my close.
Thank you, Charlotte. And congrats on the Google Home.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.